Dan, do you believe this deal closes today, and why?
I think a deal gets done in the next 24 hours. But because ultimately, as Ed talked about, the financing, once they laid it out, that really put feet to the fire from a board's perspective. And they ultimately needed a white knight, a second bidder to come in. Probably books went around. Private equity basically just couldn't get there. So that's why, from a board's perspective, they had to come to negotiation with Musk, a Game of Thrones, and ultimately it looks like the next 24 hours, Musk will own Twitter.
Dan, have you got a decent idea of what the plan is?
Look, I think, as this goes private, the first thing was turn to a subscription model, monetize it. They'll lose a significant amount of subs, of probably a $2-3 a month type subscription model. That would increase revenues, cash flow. So I think from a model perspective, that's something that happens right off the board. Of course, getting rid of the bots, cleaning up the platform, potentially combining with some other initiatives, some other acquisitions. I think that's ultimately the goal here, because it comes down to freedom of speech is one thing. He's betting 20% of his net worth on Twitter. So I think that ultimately, now the strategy really needs to be outlaid.
What are the benefits of being private, Dan? Everything you said that they're going to do, what do they need to go private to do that they can't do as a public company?
Well, it's a great question. They could do it behind the scenes. Every quarter, they don't have to answer shareholders. I think that's really the difficult part when you go through a transition like this from a quarterly perspective. And I think that's why they would take it private. Ultimately, maybe over the next few years, come back out, and it could always go public down the road. But look, I think it just came down to the board was looking for a second bidder. They thought a second bidder would come. It never came. Fiduciary, they had to sit down, and now Musk, it looks like it's in a course, I'd say the last stage to get this deal done.
Dan, you mentioned that they'll push and lean heavily on a subscription model. How do you think advertisers will react to this?
I think there'll be clear pushback. And I think ultimately right now, this becomes a lightning rod on both sides of the aisle, in terms of how this ultimately is going to sort of as a platform. And for Musk, there's political risk in terms of for Tesla, for SpaceX. I think that's why you're seeing that react accordingly in terms of shares. Ultimately, the equity financing that Ed talked about, I think that's something that he just got $25 billion of stock from a target that they reached. So I think that's a big issue. But no doubt, I mean, what you're essentially doing here in the eyes of many, you're trading caviar for a New York City hot dog in terms of Tesla for Twitter shares. And it's a head scratcher, but ultimately it looks like probably by the end of the day, this deal gets done.
Dan, you just said something really interesting. You think this invites risk, regulatory risk, for the likes of Tesla and other Elon Musk ventures because of what he might do with Twitter. Can you just build that out a little bit more?
Look, at the end of the day, from a Tesla shareholder perspective, this is not what you want to see. There's no benefit for Tesla or SpaceX, but it invites, both in the Beltway as well as Brussels, more of that polarized view, right? Some view Musk as a hero, others view him as a villain. It just increases that sort of, I think, noise at a time that Tesla investors don't want to see it. So let's just be clear. That's why Tesla sells off here. As a Tesla investor, buying Twitter, that's not what you want to see. But it is what it is. Musk is going to get it. There is no second bidder. And now it's really just a matter of, I think, timing and, sort of dotting the I's, crossing the T's to get this done.
Dan, just on key man risk, Jay Pawlowski of TW joined us in the last hour, and he said he doesn't see it at Tesla. I know a lot of people who do. Where do you stand on that, Dan?
I think Musk's sole focus, at least over the next year or two, I mean, Tesla's a major focus. We've seen it with the Giga build-outs, of course, with Cybertruck and some of the issues they have to navigate in China, but balancing a lot of balls here, right? I mean, if you look at the situation with SpaceX now with Twitter, he wouldn't be CEO of Twitter, probably a chairman role, but no doubt there's going to be a bright spotlight here. That's also why Musk, likely another comp package to make sure he stays on as CEO and chairman, no issues for the next 5 years. But look, it just adds more uncertainty. And just look, go back the last 2 weeks. I mean, the street viewed it was a 10%, maybe 5% chance this deal gets done. Now it's probably upper 90s.